Okay, get ready, because we're going to take a deep dive into something that's, well, it's going to be unavoidable pretty soon, polling accuracy.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not talking about picking your favorite ice cream flavor or anything. I mean, that's important too.
Right.
We're talking about all those political polls that are going to be coming at us from every direction leading up to the 2024 elections.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's going to be like a tidal wake of information, and a lot of it's just going to be noise.
Exactly. So how do we figure out what's real and what's not?
Right.
Well, we've got some really interesting stuff to share with you today. Insights from John Krosnick. He's a veteran pollster from Stanford, and this was in Knowable magazine.
Oh, yeah, I read that article. He had some pretty surprising things to say, like how America might actually be less polarized than everyone thinks.
Yeah, but before we get into that, we got to understand what makes a poll trustworthy in the first place.
Definitely. And Krosnick, he really makes the point that polls are more than just a bunch of people's opinions. They're like a snapshot of what the whole country is thinking and feeling.
So it's not just about swaying voters during campaigns. It's actually impacting our lives.
Oh, for sure. Like, think about how unemployment rates, they affect government funding and all those public health initiatives. They're based on data, and a lot of that data comes from polls.
Wow, I never really thought of it like that.
Yeah?
So this is important stuff. And obviously, as we get closer to 2024, those polls are going to shape how we see the candidates, the issues, the whole election.
Yeah. And they can even act as a check on the election results, which is especially important after all the controversies we've had lately.
Right, right. Having accurate polls can make us feel more confident about the outcome. So, okay, let's get down to brass tacks here. If we want to be informed poll readers, what should we be looking for? What's the gold standard when it comes to polling?
Well, ideally, you'd want face-to-face interviews with people chosen randomly from different households, kind of like how the U.S. Census does it.
Oh, okay.
It's definitely expensive, but super accurate.
So that's the ideal scenario, but let's be real, most polls don't do it that way. So what about those phone polls? Are they even reliable anymore with cell phones and caller ID and everything?
Actually, yeah. If they're done right, phone polls can be almost as accurate as those face-to-face interviews. They just have to use random digit dialing and include both landlines and cell phones.
That's good to know. I think most people assume phone polls are a thing of the past.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Okay, so phone polls, we can take that off. But what about those online polls that are like everywhere these days? Are those even worth paying attention to?
That's where things get tricky. Well-designed online panels, the kind used by universities and research institutions, those can be pretty accurate. They use similar methods to phone surveys to make sure they have a good mix of people. But, and this is a big but, there are tons of cheap online polls that are, well, not so scientific.
That's going to say, I bet there's a but coming there.
Exactly. You know those banners you see that say, take a survey for money?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times, anyone can join those panels, so it's not random at all, and people might not even be giving honest answers.
So it's like the difference between getting your news from a reliable source versus reading a random post on social media.
That's a great analogy.
They both look like information, but one is much more reliable than the other.
Right. That's why we can't just trust every poll we see. And John Krosnick in the article, he brings up another tricky aspect, something a lot of people don't even think about.
Oh, what's that?
The way the questions are worded.
Okay, so how can the wording of a question make a difference in how people answer?
Well, Krosnick gives this example about asking people about Biden's presidency. If you phrase the question in a couple of different ways, you can actually get results that differ by, like, 15%.
15%? Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. It just goes to show how important it is to be careful about polls that don't tell you exactly how the questions were asked.
Okay, so if they don't tell us the actual questions, how can we tell if a poll is any good?
It's a tough one, for sure. And it's actually gotten harder because a lot of news organizations, they don't have those dedicated polling experts anymore.
Oh, right.
The people who could really analyze those polls before they report on them.
So we're basically getting a ton of information, or maybe it's misinformation, but it's not being checked as carefully as it used to be?
Yeah, pretty much. And that just makes it even more confusing for people to figure out what they can trust.
So are we just supposed to give up? Like, are all polls basically meaningless now?
No, not at all. There are things we can do to be smarter about how we read polls. It all starts with being a little skeptical, a little bit curious.
Okay, I like that. Skeptical and curious. So what should we be looking out for? Like, what are some red flags and green flags when it comes to polls?
The biggest thing is always check how they did the poll, like their methodology.
Okay.
Look for those signs of a good poll. Did they use random sampling? Was it face-to-face, over the phone, or a reputable online panel? If they don't give you that information, that's a big red flag. Be suspicious.
So if they're not upfront about how they did it, that's a bad sign.
Exactly. Transparency is key. And pay attention to how they describe who they polled. Did they ask likely voters, registered voters, or just anyone who happened to click a link?
Right, because who they're asking is just as important as how they're asking them.
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting? John Krosnick, he's actually starting a new center for survey excellence at Stanford.
Oh, wow, really? That's amazing. What will they be doing?
Their goal is to improve the quality of surveys and make it easier for people to understand them. Like they want to provide resources to help people evaluate polls, which is something we really need right now.
Yeah, for sure. This whole conversation has made it clear that polls can have a big impact.
Oh, definitely. If we're basing important decisions on bad polls, things can go wrong. Think about government policies, how we spend money, even how we respond to crises like the pandemic.
Right. A lot of those decisions are based on data, and if the data's bad, the decisions could be bad too.
Exactly. So being smart about polls isn't just about being a good voter. It's also about protecting ourselves and our communities.
You know, it was really surprising to me when I read that most people will never actually be called for a poll,
It's true. Sample sizes are tiny compared to the whole population.
which I guess means that if we do get that call, we should take it seriously.
I think so. It's a chance to have our voices heard, and now we know how to make sure it's done right.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of the technical stuff about polls, but Krosnick's work also brings up a bigger question.
Yeah.
What if America isn't as divided as all those polls make it seem?
That's the big question, isn't it? If we're not actually that different from each other, then who's benefiting from making us think we are?
Then I'm wondering, who's pushing this idea of us versus them and why?
Maybe it's the media, maybe it's politicians, maybe it's a little bit of everything. But we need to be aware of how polls can be used to manipulate us, even if it's not intentional.
Because if we're not careful, we're basically letting someone else control how we see the world, how we see each other.
And that could have a real impact on the choices we make and the future of our country.
So what's the most important thing we want our listeners to remember?
Don't be afraid to question everything. Don't just believe what you're told. Be curious, be critical.
I like that. Be a skeptical and curious citizen.
Exactly. Always think about who did the poll and who's reporting on it, and what might their reasons be for doing it in the first place.
Because almost always there's some kind of agenda, right? Someone's trying to get us to think a certain way.
Pretty much. And the more we understand about polls, the better we'll be at seeing through that and finding the truth.
This has been really eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new way of looking at polls now. I'm going to be much more careful about what I believe.
That's great to hear, because being informed and involved is more important now than ever.
Absolutely. But before we go, there's one last thought I want to leave everyone with. So we've been talking about how polls can be messed with, how the way they ask questions can change the results, and how some people might be using these polls to make it seem like we're all fighting with each other more than we really are. But here's the thing that really got me thinking. What if we're not as divided as they want us to believe?
Yeah. What if we actually agree on more things than we realize? That's one of the most interesting things Krosnick is talking about. He says that America might not be as polarized as we think, at least not according to the polls.
Which makes you wonder, why does this idea that we're all so different keep going? If it's not really true, then someone's getting something out of making us believe it.
It's like we're trapped in a fun house. We see these polls saying we're all divided, and then the media, the politicians, even our own social media feeds, they just make it seem even worse.
Right. And we all start thinking the worst of each other, like we can't even talk anymore.
And that's the problem. If we let this idea of being divided go on, it makes it impossible to fix the real problems we have. Climate change, the economy, healthcare, we need to work together to solve these things. But we can't if we're too busy fighting.
It's almost like someone's playing us like we're puppets on a string.
And the worst part is, we might be going along with it without even knowing. We're so used to this idea of being divided that we don't even question it anymore.
So how do we get out of this mess? If bad polls and biased information are manipulating us, how do we take back control?
The first step is to be aware of what's happening. And once we understand how polls worked and how they can be twisted, we can start to see things more clearly.
So it's about being smarter about all information, not just polls, but everything we see and hear.
Exactly. We need to think critically, question what we're told, and try to get different points of view.
And maybe, just maybe, we'll find out that we have more in common than we thought, that those lines between us and them aren't as clear as they seem.
I hope so. By understanding how people try to manipulate us, we can see the world better and actually talk to each other in a way that makes sense.
Well, I feel a bit more hopeful now. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about, and I hope our listeners feel the same way.
I agree. It's been a great discussion.
So to everyone listening, don't just take in information without thinking. Be curious, be critical, and most importantly, be involved. The future of our country might depend on it.
Well said. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep digging deeper.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.